Greetings, my name is Martha Linehan and I'm a volunteer for the Yolo Basin Foundation. We are here at the beautiful Yolo Bypass Wildlife Area, which hopefully you can see around you. The Yolo Basin Foundation is a nonprofit organization that provides outdoor education and access, tours, for example, of this wonderful wildlife area. The wildlife area itself is just west of the city of Sacramento, and you will be able to see at some point that we are immediately south of Highway 80 with trucks and cars roaring by us, while behind me you can also see some incredible waterfowl and other wildlife. As a matter of fact, I can even hear a wren singing in the background. It's a marvelous area. So my background is that I was a biologist for first the Colorado Division of Wildlife, then the Coastal Commission, and then the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, which is actually the organization that owns this property, this wildlife area, owns and manages it. I then went to law school and became a water lawyer, and I practiced water law for 35 years here in California. I'm retired now and enjoying being a volunteer for this marvelous organization and being able to visit this wildlife area, which you can also do. This video is going to focus on water and water rights for the wildlife area. I'm going to start by talking about the physical and hydrologic context for the wildlife area. One of the unique things about water law is that it is essential to understand the physical context in order to understand the water rights. So let's start with that. The first thing to understand is how crucial water is for a wetlands wildlife habitat. Obviously, without water, we wouldn't be able to have all of the aquatic insects, the aquatic birds, all of the things, plants that sustain the habitat out here in the Yolo Bypass Wildlife Area. So wetlands absolutely require water. One of the sad features that we have in California is that we have lost so much of our wetlands habitat. So retaining that habitat and assuring that it has an essential water supply is something that's really important for all of us. Why here? Why is there a wetlands here in this particular location? Well, when you look around, you can see that it's relatively flat. This is the Sacramento Valley, and we are bordered on the east by the Sacramento River, which runs from north to south down to the delta. On the west, we're bordered by the coastal mountains. And so this forms a large, flat, essentially an overflow area for the Sacramento River. We're sandwiched, in effect, between the Sacramento River and the coastal mountains. And the natural overflow of the Sacramento River has sustained this as a periodic wetlands for many centuries. However, now we call this a bypass. Why do we call it a bypass? Well, what's happened over time is that there have been levees and weirs built that channel the water, so we no longer have this large natural overflow. In fact, the overflow occurs, but it only occurs during really wet years. So during normal and dry years, what happens is the water is channeled in order to protect the urban environment into the Sacramento River channel, and then it is allowed through the weirs to flood this bypass area, again in order to protect our human development. So water rights, again, would be essential for this area because it no longer benefits from the frequent flooding that occurred in a state of nature. There are other sources of input of water for this area besides the Sacramento River. And they include Cache Creek, which is just north of here, and Puda Creek, which runs through the city of Davis and then provides an input to the wildlife area a little bit to the south. However, the majority of the water for this wildlife area comes from the Sacramento River system. Fundamentally, there have been two major changes to this area that have substantially altered what happens. One is the reduction in the volume of water that is available to the wildlife area, but also to the Sacramento River itself. As you can imagine, up and down the Sacramento and in its tributaries, as well as along Cache Creek and Puda Creek to the west, there are thousands and thousands of new diversions. The diversions serve beneficial uses. They're off-stream diversions for urban development, for agriculture, for industry. But one of their consequences is that we have, in normal and dry years, much less of a water supply to serve our wetlands and other aquatic ecosystems. The second is the physical attributes have changed enormously. As I mentioned earlier, the levee development, which started actually with private farmers moving here in the 1800s and possibly earlier, who would start to build levees in order to convert the vast wetlands of the Sacramento Valley into agriculturally viable property. And it became competitive, of course, because when one farmer built a levee, that shunted the water off, which would increase flooding on somebody else's property. Now we have consolidated some of the major features of this levee and weir system into what we call the Sacramento River Flood Control Project. I'd like to put in front of you a map that is really illustrative of what I'm talking about in terms of the north to south feature of this system. It's very linear, and also the changes that we have made physically to the system that impact the wetlands that we have here in the Yolo Bypass Wildlife Area. This schematic shows the definitive north to south pathway of California's water geography. The blue line outlines the Sacramento River watershed, which actually extends north up into the corner of eastern Oregon. It also includes where we are standing today in the Yolo Bypass. The bypass is also within the Delta watershed outlined in green on the map. The wildlife area is north of the Delta pumps that you can see delineated on the map. Switch to maps A and B, which focus us in on the Yolo Bypass. These maps are taken from a study of methylated mercury uptake by Chinook salmon. You can see, just for interest, that what are called the CWT release points on this map, map B, are where tagged salmon were released to be recaptured near the south end of the bypass after living in the bypass waters. In a state of nature, of course, the bypass would flood quite frequently, but today the Yolo Bypass is managed incredibly effectively by a series of weirs and levees that direct the volume of water and the direction of flow that can make it to this wetlands area or be prevented from coming to this wetlands area. Note that the wildlife area is shown in a hatched, cross-hatched on the second map, map B. The Yolo Bypass itself starts up near the confluence of the Feather and the Sacramento rivers north of the Sacramento International Airport, and it is actually in Sutter County. Two of the water control structures that affect flows in the Yolo Bypass are the Fremont Weir, which is up by that Feather-Sacramento Rivers confluence, and then just north of the city of Sacramento is the Sacramento Weir. Note the tow drain along the east edge of the Yolo Bypass. This is a really critical water conveyance ditch for this bypass wildlife area. The levee and weir water management system is overwhelmed, in all honesty, during big wet years, with water spreading everywhere into the bypass and inundating this wildlife area. But in normal and dry years, the water is constrained and kept within the Sacramento River channel, and water has to be provided by other means to ensure that this wildlife area remains a wetlands. Thus, we have here a system that is in partial a mimic of the natural system, with overflows from the Sacramento River into the bypass. But in most years, really the vast majority of years, which are either normal or below normal, or drought as this one is yet again, this is a very heavily managed system. In the next segment, what we will look at is the water rights and the water management that keeps the water flowing to this wetlands and maintains the marvelous habitat that we see here today. Wow, this is awesome. How fortunate we are to see and hear that. That is wonderful.